The desert sun carved shadows across red earth as the afternoon train thundered through the canyon, black smoke trailing like a funeral shroud. From his sandstone perch, the man with no name watched through his Winchester's scope, weathered hands, steady as granite. Before we begin, we'd like to ask you to tell us your name and the city you're watching from. We love getting to know our audience. Also, please don't forget to give this video a like, share it with others, and subscribe to our channel. That way, we can keep bringing you more stories like this one below. Stolen Apache artifacts rattled in wooden crates, sacred masks, ceremonial pottery, silver jewelry that had adorned chiefs for generations. The bandits who'd raided the reservation. Burial grounds thought they'd made it clean, escaped to Santa Fe. They hadn't counted on the drifter. His Mustang shifted restlessly, sensing what was coming. Violence had a smell in the desert, metallic and sharp. Like lightning before a storm, the train rounded the bend, whistle echoing off canyon walls. The drifter squeezed the trigger. Steam hissed from the punctured boiler as sparks flew from grinding. Wheels. In the sudden silence, dust settled over the stalled locomotive. "What the hell happened?" shouted Jake Morrison, the gang leader, climbing down from the passenger car. His three companions followed, hands reaching for guns. The drifter descended like a ghost, rifle trained on the group. "You boys are carrying something that doesn't belong to you." Morrison spat tobacco juice. "And who might you be to tell us? Our business? Stranger? Someone who knows the difference between a grave and a general store?" The drifter's voice carried absolute certainty. "Those artifacts go back where they belong." Standoff stretched like a bowstring. Heat waves danced between the men until reality itself seemed to shimmer. One of Morrison's men let his hand drift too close to his gun. The drifter's rifle barked once. The man's hat flew off, the bullet parting his hair by a whisker. He stumbled backward, face white as bone. "Next one doesn't miss," the drifter said. Quietly, Morrison read death in the stranger's eyes and slowly raised his hands. 20 minutes later, the bandits rode away empty-handed. The drifter was loading artifacts onto his horse when the Apache war party found him. They materialized from the desert like earth spirits, 5 warriors on painted ponies, faces streaked with war paint, rifles gleaming. Their leader, silver threading through black braids, raised his hand. "You are the one who stopped the iron horse," the leader said in accented English. "I am." "You know what these boxes contain?" The drifter nodded toward the crates. "Things that belong to the dead, things that should rest in peace." The Apache leader studied him with ancient eyes. "I am Joseph Crowfeather. These sacred items were stolen from my people. My grandfather, Chief Thunderheart, sent me to recover them or die trying. They're yours now." The drifter stepped back. Crowfeather examined the artifacts, weathered, hands trembling as he lifted a ceremonial mask. "This belonged to my great-grandfather. It was buried with him on the sacred mountain." "Why?" Crowfeather asked finally. "Why does a white man risk his life for Apache dead?" The drifter adjusted his hat. "Some things are worth more than gold. Chief Thunderheart will want to meet the man who returned our ancestors. Will you come to our camp?" The drifter had nowhere else to be. "I'll come." They rode silently across Badlands as the sun descended, painting the sky in fire and blood. The Apache camp lay hidden in a box canyon, protected by natural walls and watchful sentries. Chief Thunderheart was ancient beyond measure, his face a map of every hardship his people had endured. He sat outside his teepee, wrapped in a blanket. Despite the heat, clouded eyes somehow still seeing everything. "You have given my people a great gift," the chief said in formal English. "You have returned our dead to proper rest. This cannot go unrewarded. I don't need payment." Thunderheart smiled, revealing teeth worn smooth by 90 winters. "A gift freely given demands a gift freely offered. It is our way." He gestured to a young woman watching from beside a nearby lodge. She stepped into the firelight, and the drifter felt his breath catch. She was beautiful like the desert was beautiful, wild, untamed, carved by wind and sun into something both delicate and enduring. Her dark hair fell in a decorated braid, small silver bells chiming softly as she moved. "This is my granddaughter, Ayana," Thunderheart said. Her name means eternal blossom. She is strong like mountain cedar, wise like old songs, and proud, like the eagle that rides storm winds. Ayana's dark eyes met the drifter's briefly, and he saw intelligence there, defiance, and something that might have been curiosity. Then she looked away, jaw set in stubborn independence. I offer her to you as wife, Thunderheart continued. Among our people, this is the highest honor to join your bloodline with ours, to make you family in the eyes of the Great Spirit. The words hit the drifter like a physical blow. He'd expected maybe a horse, or silver, or simply the honor of leaving alive. No, not this. Chief Thunderheart, he began carefully, I'm honored, but do you refuse our gift? The old man's voice carried subtle warning. Around the camp, conversations died. Warriors watching now observed with careful attention. The drifter looked at Ayana again. Her face was a mask of controlled emotion, but he could see tension in her shoulders. She was as trapped by this moment as he was. I accept your generosity, he said finally. This affects more than just me. What does your granddaughter say? Ayana stepped forward, voice carrying the clear ring of distant thunder. Grandfather, with respect, I can speak for myself. She faced the drifter directly. You saved our sacred ancestors from dishonor. For this, I will marry you as my grandfather wishes. But know this, stranger, you may claim my hand, but you cannot claim my heart. That belongs to the wind and mountains, and I give it to no man. The drifter nodded slowly. He understood pride. Fair enough, Miss Ayana. I wouldn't expect anything different. Thunderheart clapped his hands, the sound echoing through the canyon like a gunshot. It is decided then. Tomorrow, when the sun reaches the center of the sky, you will be joined. According to our ancient customs, tonight we feast. As Apache women began preparing for the celebration, the drifter found himself standing alone at the camp's edge, staring into the vast darkness. Stars were beginning to appear in the purple sky. He'd spent so many years running from the law, from memories, from ghosts of men he'd killed. The idea of staying in one place, of belonging somewhere, felt as foreign as the Apache language flowing around him. Behind him, drums began to beat, and voices rose in ancient songs. Tomorrow, he would take a wife he didn't know, join a tribe that had every reason to hate him, and try to find a place in a world he'd been running from his entire adult life. The drifter touched his hat brim and walked back toward the fire, toward the music and light, and the uncertain promise of something that might, if he was very lucky, finally feel like home. 3 weeks into their marriage, Thomas Mitchell discovered that living with Ayana was like trying to tame a wildfire beautiful, dangerous, and utterly unpredictable. She had agreed to share his lodge, but maintained an invisible boundary that made it clear he was still very much a stranger. Their days fell into careful routine. Thomas would rise before dawn to tend horses, work that kept his hands busy while his mind wrestled with this new life. Ayana would be gone when he returned, off with other women gathering herbs, but always back by evening to share their meal in careful politeness. This morning was different. Thomas woke to find Ayana already up, sitting cross-legged beside the cold fire pit, staring at something in her hands. In pale pre-dawn light, he could see it was a photograph, old and creased, showing a young Apache couple. Your parents? He asked quietly. She didn't look up. My mother and father. This was taken just before I was born, before the soldiers came to Crying Woman Creek. Thomas sat up slowly, pulling on his shirt. He'd heard fragments from Crow Feather, peaceful Apache band caught by surprise, families scattered, children orphaned. What were they like? My father was a storyteller. He could make the campfire dance with shadows that acted out his tales. My mother was a healer. She knew every plant in the desert. She traced the photograph's edge with one finger. I remember her singing to me when storms came, Apache lullabies that made thunder sound like drums calling rain spirits home. You must miss them terribly. Every day. She finally looked at him, vulnerability in her dark eyes. I dream about them sometimes. In the dreams they're still alive, and I'm still a child who believes the world is safe. Thomas understood that kind of loss, the way it carved hollow, spaces that never quite healed. I lost my family too. Different circumstances, but the empty feeling is the same. Something shifted in her expression, recognition that perhaps they shared more common ground than either had realized. "Will you tell me about them?" she asked. It was the first personal question she'd asked him. Thomas had spent so many years avoiding his past that talking about it felt like speaking a foreign language. "My parents had a farm in Kansas," he began slowly. "My father was quiet but fair. My mother could make biscuits that would spoil you for anyone else's cooking. Had it happened to them? Daughter ruffians. During the bleeding Kansas troubles. They came looking for abolitionists, found my father hiding a runaway slave family in our barn. Thomas stared into cold ashes. They burned everything. Shot my parents and the family they were protecting. I was 14, hiding in the root cellar." Ayanna's hand moved almost unconsciously toward his, then stopped. "That's when you became a drifter. That's when I became a lot of things." Thomas stood and began building up the fire. "Joined the Union Army when I was old enough to lie about my age. After the war, I tried going back to Kansas, but there was nothing left. Been moving ever since. Until now." "Until now?" He agreed. "Thomas," Ayanna said suddenly, "what do you know about Apache marriage customs?" The question was so unexpected he nearly dropped the coffee pot. "I know what Thunderheart told me during the ceremony. Honor, respect, commitment to the tribe. But do you know what it means to truly be married among my people?" She stood and moved to a painted buffalo hide on the lodge wall, pointing to symbols that meant nothing to him. "Among the Apache, marriage is not just about joining two people. It's about creating a new family unit that strengthens the entire tribe. The husband and wife must learn to think as one mind, to work together, like two hands on the same body." "Sounds complicated, it is." She turned back to face him. "It requires trust. Complete trust." Thomas sensed they were approaching something important. "Are you trying to tell me something specific, Ayanna?" She took a deep breath. "Yesterday, when you were working with the horses, some of the women asked me questions about our marriage. Personal questions." "What kind of personal questions?" Color rose in her cheeks, but she met his eyes steadily. "They wanted to know why I still flinch when you move too quickly. Why I sleep with a knife under my blanket. Why we sit on opposite sides of the lodge like strangers." Thomas felt a knot forming in his stomach. "What did you tell them?" "I told them it was none of their concern." Her voice was tight with frustration. "But the truth is, I don't know how to be a wife, Thomas. I don't know how to trust a man I barely know, even one who has proven himself honorable." The honesty hit him like a physical blow. He'd been so focused on his own discomfort that he hadn't fully considered what this was costing her. "Ayanna," he said carefully, "I want you to know that I don't expect anything from you that you're not ready to give. How we live this marriage is up to us." "But that's just it," she said, voice rising slightly. "I don't know what I want to give or what you want to receive. We're both pretending to be something we're not, and it's making both of us miserable." She was right. The careful politeness they'd maintained was slowly suffocating them both. "So what do you suggest we do about it?" Ayanna squared her shoulders in the gesture he'd learned meant she was about to do something that scared her. "I suggest we stop pretending and start being honest about what we want, what we fear, what we need from each other." "That's a dangerous proposition," Thomas said quietly. "Honesty has a way of revealing things people would rather keep hidden." "Good." Her eyes flashed with sudden fire. "I'm tired of hiding. From you, from my people, from myself. If this marriage is going to work, it has to be built on truth, not comfortable lies." Thomas studied her face, seeing determination there, and courage and a vulnerability she was choosing to show him. It was the first real gift she'd offered since their wedding day. "All right," he said, "truth it is. But we do this together, no holding back." Agreed. They shook hands solemnly. "I'll start," he said. "The truth is, I married you because I didn't see any other choice that wouldn't insult your grandfather, or put your people in danger. But I'm staying married to you because I've never met anyone like you, Ayanna. You're fierce and intelligent and beautiful, and being around you makes me want to be a better man." She blinked in surprise. "The truth is," she said slowly, I married you because duty to my grandfather mattered more than my own feelings. But I'm discovering that you're not what I expected. You're gentler than you pretend to be. And when you look at me, you see a person, not just a woman to be possessed. What else?" She hesitated, then plunged ahead. "I'm afraid of you sometimes. Not because I think you'll hurt me, but because you have the power to hurt me. I've never let anyone that close before. I'm afraid of you too," Thomas admitted. "You see things in me that I'm not sure are really there. What if I disappoint you? Then we'll figure it out together." She moved closer, close enough that he could smell sage smoke in her hair. "But no more sleeping with weapons under our blankets. No more sitting on opposite sides of the lodge. No more pretending we're strangers." "What are you suggesting?" "Suggesting we try being married? Really married? Not the careful arrangement we've been maintaining, but something real." Thomas felt his heart speed up. "Are you sure about this?" "No," she said honestly. "But I'm sure that what we're doing now isn't working." "All right," he said quietly. "But we go slow. We take time to actually know each other." "Slow," she agreed, "but together." She held out her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, he took it. Her fingers were warm and real and immediate, in a way that made this feel like the first honest moment they'd shared since their wedding. They were interrupted by a commotion outside, horses arriving at speed, voices raised in alarm. Thomas grabbed his rifle automatically, but Ayanna was already moving toward the lodge entrance. "We're partners now, remember?" she said. "We face things together." They emerged from the lodge together to find the camp in controlled chaos. A scout had ridden in with news that had sent Thunderheart into urgent conference with his war leaders. Crowfeather spotted them and jogged over, his face grim. "White soldiers coming," he reported tersely. "Different ones this time, with a wagon train of settlers. They're flying a truce flag. But this is Colonel Marcus Hartwell, out of Fort Grant. He has a reputation for aggressive solutions to Indian problems." Thomas looked around the camp, taking in the defensive preparations, the worried faces. These people had become his responsibility now, whether he'd asked for it or not. "What does Thunderheart want to do?" "Talk first," Crowfeather said. "Fight if talking fails." But Hartwell didn't come all this way just to chat. Thomas checked his rifle and adjusted his gun belt, feeling the familiar weight of weapons that had been his companions for so many years. But this time, he wasn't preparing to fight for money or survival or some abstract cause. This time, he was fighting for home. The dust cloud on the horizon grew larger as Colonel Hartwell's force approached the canyon entrance. Through his field glasses, Thomas could count 30 cavalry soldiers, a supply wagon, and what looked like a civilian contingent, men in suits who had the soft look of bureaucrats and the hard eyes of profiteers. "Government officials," Thunderheart said quietly, lowering his own spyglass. "Come to discuss our relocation to more suitable lands." "Meaning less valuable lands," Ayanna added bitterly. She stood beside Thomas on the canyon rim, her rifle ready but not yet raised. "Lands without silver deposits or good grazing." Thomas studied the approaching column with practiced eyes. "They're not coming to negotiate," he said finally. "Look at how they're deployed, flanking units on both sides. Main force ready to charge." This is a military operation disguised as a diplomatic mission." The cavalry column had reached the canyon mouth. Colonel Hartwell rode at its head, a tall man with prematurely gray hair and military bearing that suggested he'd seen action in the Indian Wars. The civilians followed close behind, their fancy clothes already dusty. Thunderheart emerged from the canyon to meet them, flanked by his war leaders, his dignity intact despite being outnumbered 3-1. The two leaders met in the open ground between the canyon entrance and the cavalry formation. "Chief Thunderheart," Hartwell's voice was crisp and military. "I come representing the territorial government and the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Need to discuss your people's future in this region. We are living peacefully on reservation land granted by treaty," Thunderheart replied in his careful English. "What is there to discuss?" One of the civilians stepped forward, a heavyset man with the pale complexion of someone who spent most of his time indoors. "Chief, my name is Samuel Wickham, Territorial Mining Assessor. I'm afraid there's been a development that affects your land rights." Thomas felt Ayanna tense beside him. Mining assessor meant mineral rights, which meant someone had found something valuable under Apache land. A geological survey has discovered significant silver deposits in this canyon system, Wickham announced, producing a rolled document. Under the Territorial Mining Act of 1872, these lands are now classified as valuable mineral territory and must be made available for legitimate mining operations. Our treaty makes no mention of mineral rights, Thunderheart said evenly.
Oh, this?
Land was granted in perpetuity for our use. Treaties can be reinterpreted, another civilian interjected smoothly, especially when the greater good is at stake. The silver in these mountains could fund schools, hospitals, infrastructure that would benefit everyone, including yourselves, Crowfeather said dryly. Hartwell shot the Apache warrior a warning look. The point is, Chief, that your people would be much more comfortable on the new reservation we've prepared in Arizona. Better farmland, government supplies, protection from hostile settlers. You mean the desert wasteland where the Warm Springs Band was sent to die? Thunderheart replied. I have heard about your protection, Colonel. The temperature of the conversation was dropping rapidly. Thomas could see the cavalry soldiers shifting in their saddles, hands moving closer to their weapons. The government is prepared to offer compensation for your relocation. $5,000 for the entire tribe, Wickham announced. The insult was so blatant that even the soldiers looked uncomfortable. Thomas had seen mining claims in the territory of the silver in this canyon. The system was worth at least 50 times that amount. $5,000, Thunderheart repeated slowly. For the bones of our ancestors, the sacred sites of our people, the homeland we have protected for generations. Thunderheart's response was delivered with the dignity of a man who had led his people through decades of betrayal. We decline your generous offer. This is our home, granted by treaty with the United States government. We will not leave. Hartwell's face hardened. Chief, I strongly advise you to reconsider. The territorial government has already issued mining permits for this area. If your people are still here when the mining operations begin, what? Thunderheart challenged. You'll murder us like you murdered the Warm Springs Band. That was different, Hartwell said coldly.
Away.
They were engaged in hostilities. They were defending their children from your soldiers. The pretense of diplomacy was crumbling rapidly. Thomas could see the civilians growing nervous, realizing their neat little land grab was about to turn bloody. I'm going to give you 24 hours to reconsider, Hartwell announced. After that, this canyon will be cleared for mining operations, with or without your cooperation. And if we refuse, Hartwell's smile was as cold as winter wind. Chief, you have 43 people in your band, including women and children. I have 30 soldiers, plus territorial militia on call. Do the mathematics. Thunderheart straightened. To his full height, every inch the war chief he'd once been. Colonel Hartwell, my people have been fighting for this land longer than your country has existed. We know something about mathematics, too. The old chief turned and walked back toward the canyon, his war leaders following. Thomas was over. Thomas. And Ayanna scrambled down from their observation post as the Apache leadership returned to camp. The atmosphere was grim. Everyone understood what the next 24 hours would bring. What did you think of our guests? Thunderheart asked Thomas as they gathered around the council fire. I think they've already decided to take your land regardless of what you say, Thomas replied honestly. The question is whether they're planning to do it legally or illegally. Thomas had seen this pattern before in Kansas, in Colorado, in half a dozen other territories. If you agree to relocate, they'll move you to Arizona and claim the land. Legally, if you refuse, they'll provoke an incident that allows them to declare you hostiles and remove you by force. What kind of incident, Crowfeather asked. Could be anything. A shot fired during a misunderstanding. A settler's cabin burned by Apache raiders. They don't need much, just enough to justify military action. Miana was pacing around the fire like a caged wolf. So our choices are to surrender our homeland. Voluntarily, or die defending it. There might be a third option, Thomas said carefully. All eyes turned to him. Thunderheart leaned forward, his ancient face carved with the weight of his people's survival. Hartwell is here on territorial authority, not federal. His orders probably come from the governor's office, not Washington. If we could get word to the federal authorities, prove that this is an illegal land grab rather than a legitimate treaty renegotiation. The federal government cares no more for Apache rights than the territorial government, Thunderheart said bitterly. Maybe, but they do care about territorial governors overstepping their authority. And they definitely care about mining speculators using federal troops for private profit. Crowfeather was nodding slowly. You're talking about politics? I'm talking about bureaucracy, Thomas corrected. Federal and territorial authorities fight over jurisdiction all the time. If we can prove Hartwell's acting outside his legal authority— How? Ayanna demanded. Even if you're right, how do we get word to them? Hartwell's not going to let messengers ride out. Thomas had been thinking about that problem. We don't send a messenger. We make them come to us. Meaning we make this situation too public to ignore. Hartwell and his friends want this to be a quiet little land grab. But if this becomes a federal case, newspapers back east start writing about military officers helping mining speculators steal Indian land. It becomes a scandal, Thunderheart finished. And politicians hate scandals worse than they hate Indians. Exactly, but we'd need proof of the conspiracy. Documents, witnesses, something that couldn't be dismissed as Apache propaganda. Ayanna stopped pacing. I might be able to help with that.
Honest.
Looked at her sharply. Before my grandfather adopted the ways of peace, I used to scout for him during raids. I'm very good at moving through enemy camps without being seen. Absolutely not, Thomas said immediately. It's too dangerous. Everything is dangerous now, she replied calmly. But I'm the only one here who could get close enough to their camp to overhear conversations. Maybe find some of those documents you mentioned. She's right, Crowfeather said reluctantly. Ayanna could move through their perimeter like smoke. Thomas felt panic rising in his chest. The idea of his wife sneaking through a hostile military camp made his blood run cold. There has to be another way? What other way? Ayanna challenged. Fight 30 soldiers with our 20 warriors? Watch our children die because we were too proud to try trickery instead of battle? She was right, and he hated it. If they were going to save the tribe, they'd need to be smarter than their enemies, not just braver. All right, he said finally, but you're not going alone, Thomas. No, his voice carried absolute finality. We're partners now, remember? We face things together. Thunderheart had been listening with growing approval. It is a good plan, he announced. Dangerous. But all good plans are dangerous. They spent the rest of the day preparing. As the sun set behind the canyon walls, Thomas found himself sitting beside Ayanna, outside their lodge, both staring at the distant glow of Hartwell's campfires. Are you afraid? She asked quietly. Terrified, he admitted. You? The same? Ch! Was quiet for a moment. Thomas, if something happens to me tonight, I want you to know that these last few weeks, learning to trust you, beginning to care for you, they've been the happiest of my adult life. Thomas felt something crack inside his chest. It could be love for me too, he said quietly. It already is, maybe. She smiled then, the first completely unguarded expression he'd seen from her. Then, we have something worth fighting for. Yes, we do. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars appeared. Holding hands like the married couple they were slowly learning to become. Tomorrow they would risk everything on a desperate gamble. Tonight, they had each other and the quiet promise of a future they might not live to see. But for the first time since leaving Kansas, Thomas Mitchell felt like he was exactly where he belonged. The camp was quiet when they made their move, too. Hours before dawn, Thomas and Ayanna had blackened their faces with charcoal and dressed in dark clothing that would blend with the shadows. They moved like ghosts through the desert, using every boulder and arroyo for cover as they approached Hartwell's camp. The cavalry had made camp in a defensive circle, sentries posted at regular intervals. Professional, but not perfect. Thomas counted 2 gaps in their perimeter, places where overconfident commanders had assumed the harsh terrain provided adequate protection. They were 20 yards from the picket line when Ayanna touched his arm and pointed. Near the center of the camp, Hartwell's command tent glowed with lamplight. Shadows moved inside the colonel and his civilian partners, still awake and talking. That's where we need to be, she whispered. They moved separately, using hand signals. Thomas had learned during his army days. Tiana flowed through the darkness like water, appearing and disappearing behind supply wagons and sleeping soldiers. Thomas took a more direct route, relying on his knowledge of military camps. They reached the command tent without raising an alarm, pressing themselves against the canvas wall where the shadows were deepest. Inside, voices continued, their heated discussion. "I don't like the situation," Hartwell was saying. "These Apache aren't the usual reservation Indians. They're led by a real war chief, and they have a white man with them who knows how to fight." So, Wickham's voice carried the dismissive tone of a man who'd never seen combat. 30 soldiers against 40 Indians should be easy enough. Should be, maybe. But if it goes badly, if there are too many casualties, questions will be asked. Federal investigators will want to know why I launched a military operation without proper authorization. "You have authorization?" a third voice interjected. The territorial governor signed the order. "The territorial governor doesn't have authority over mineral rights on federal reservation land," Hartwell replied grimly. "That requires approval from Washington, which we don't have and won't get." Thomas and Ayanna exchanged glances. This was exactly what they'd hoped to hear admission, that the whole operation was illegal. "Then we need to make sure it looks legitimate," Wickham said. "Provoke them into attacking first. Once they fire on federal troops, jurisdiction becomes clear." "Oh. And how do you suggest we do that?" "Easy enough. Send a patrol to check their compliance. With the relocation order, make sure they're nervous, jumpy. Accidents happen when people are afraid." Hartwell was quiet for a long moment. "You're talking about murdering women and children? I'm talking about protecting American interests?" Wickham replied coldly. "Those silver deposits are worth millions, Colonel, enough to fund your retirement very comfortably. If the Apache don't take the bait, then we help them along." A few shots fired from the rocks, blamed on Apache snipers. "Your men return. Fire in self-defense. End of problem." Thomas felt Ayanna's hand clench into a fist against his arm. They were talking about massacre, dressed up in the language of military necessity and economic development. "I don't like it," Hartwell said finally. "But you're right about the money. And the Apache can't be allowed to block legitimate development." "Then we're agreed," Wickham said with satisfaction. "Tomorrow morning, you send a patrol to negotiate with the chief. What happens after that? ... All these things have a way of escalating beyond anyone's control." The meeting was breaking up. Thomas tugged Ayanna's arm. They needed to get out before someone emerged and spotted them. They retreated. The way they'd come, hearts pounding as they slipped between sleeping soldiers and watchful sentries. It wasn't until they were well clear of the camp that either dared to speak. "We heard enough," Thomas said grimly. "They're planning to provoke an incident, then blame your people for the massacre that follows. We have to warn my grandfather." But we also need to get word to the federal authorities. What we heard tonight proves this is an illegal conspiracy." They made their way back to the canyon as the eastern sky began to lighten. The Apache camp was stirring warriors preparing weapons, women packing essential supplies in case evacuation became necessary. Thunderheart listened to their report with the stone-faced calm of a manhood, seen too many betrayals to be surprised by one more. "So they mean to kill us regardless," he said when they'd finished. "The only question is whether they'll bother to make it look legal." "We can't let them control the situation," Thomas said. "We need to force their hand before they're ready." "How?" Thomas had been thinking about this during the walk back. "We send someone to Fort Huachuca with evidence of the conspiracy. Not just our words, something concrete that proves Hartwell's acting without federal authority. And who would believe an Apache messenger?" "Not an Apache messenger," Thomas said. "Me. I'm a white man with no criminal record. My testimony would carry weight with a federal commander." "It's too far," Ayanna protested. "Fort Huachuca is a 3-day ride. By the time you got there and back with help, I won't be coming back," Thomas said quietly. "If this works, federal troops will come here to investigate. If it doesn't," he shrugged, "at least I'll have tried." "Giannis." The voice was flat with finality. "I won't let you sacrifice yourself for what?" Thomas interrupted. "For my wife? For my people? For my home?" Took her hands in his. Yana, this is my fight now too. These are my people Hartwell wants to murder. This is my home he wants to steal. But if you leave now, you might never come back. We might never, she stopped, unable to voice the fear they both shared. Then we'd better make sure we don't waste the time we have. He kissed her then, in front of the entire tribal council, in front of her grandfather and the warriors and anyone else who cared to look. It was supposed to be a goodbye kiss. A promise to remember her by during the hard ride to Fort Huachuca. Instead, it felt like a beginning. I love you, he said against her lips, the words surprising him with their truth. I love you too, she whispered back. Come home to me, Thomas Mitchell. Count on it. He was saddling his horse when Crowfeather approached carrying a leather document case. Papers, the Apache warrior explained. Copies of our original treaty, correspondence with the Bureau of Indian Affairs, proof that this is legal reservation land. This will help. There's something else. Crowfeather handed him a folded piece of paper. I wrote down everything we overheard last night. Names, exact quotes, details about the conspiracy. Hide at Wheelitz the evidence you'll need. Thomas tucked the paper inside his shirt, next to his skin, where it would be safe. What happens if Hartwell moves before I get back? We fight, Crowfeather said simply, and we die if necessary. We won't die quietly. Thomas swung up into the saddle, checking his rifle and making sure his water was secure. The sun was climbing over the canyon rim, painting the rocks in shades of gold and red. Tell Thunderheart I'll be back, he said. Tell him to hold the canyon until federal help arrives. I'll tell him. Crowfeather gripped his horse's bridle. Ride fast, white brother. Ride like the wind itself. Thomas spurred his horse toward the canyon entrance, not looking back at the woman he'd just discovered he loved, not thinking about the odds against success, not calculating the distance to Fort Huachuca or the likelihood that federal authorities would listen to his claims. He rode like a man racing against time itself, because that's exactly what he was doing. Behind him, the people he'd come to call. Family prepared for a siege that might last hours or days. Ahead of him lay a desperate gamble that their love and their courage would be enough to build something lasting in a world that seemed determined to tear it all apart. But as his horse's hooves drummed against the desert hardpan, as the wind whipped through his hair and the sun climbed higher in the endless sky, Thomas Mitchell felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. He was no longer just a drifter running from his past. He was a husband racing toward a future worth fighting for, carrying with him the dreams of a people who had taught him the true meaning of home. The horizon stretched endlessly ahead. But for the first time in his adult life, Thomas knew exactly where he was going. He was going home.